Folks who went before us blazed the trail through history. The heritage they left behind is part of you and me. All the dreams they still live on, and it makes me proud to be a living, breathing part of it all, the American legacy.
Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. The site is well named. From this point, high above the surrounding land, you can look out for 100 miles up and down this great river valley. The Indians called the site by a different name, Chattanooga, meaning mountain rising to a point. The early settlers borrowed from that Indian term to name the city that you see in the distance.
Today it has become one of Tennessee's largest industrial centers, serving this whole southern region. You and I know it as Chattanooga. Winding through the picturesque city is the very reason for its location, the twisting, turning Tennessee River. For some 750 miles, the river and its tributaries curve and bend their way through the Tennessee Valley, carrying off rain and moisture from more than 40,000 square miles of land in this 7-state area.
It's not the size or length of this river valley that makes it so important in our history, but rather the changes that have taken place here in this region over those many years.
200 years ago, this valley was blessed with some of the richest land in America. There were forests everywhere. Buffalo, deer, small game were plentiful. The Indians had managed well this land upon which they lived, taking from it only what they needed to continue a way of life that was in balance with nature. With the coming of the white man, the valley was to change. Early settlers called them palisados. Today we would call them a palisade, a wall-like fence of sharpened logs placed deep in the ground to form a barrier.
This barrier became the first English fort built here in what is now eastern Tennessee. It was called Fort Loudon. The palisade has been restored to look much as it did when it was built way back in 1756.
In those early days, this site was in the center of the great Cherokee Nation. But strangely enough, Fort Loudon was not built to keep the Indians out, but rather to protect the Indians and their families, along with those of the English soldiers and traders who lived here. This was a time when England needed the friendship of the Cherokee Nation to help protect the southern frontier of her English colonies against her enemy, the French. In the year Fort Loudon was built, French soldiers and trappers were threatening to occupy parts of the Tennessee Valley. For 3 years, the fort served its purpose in helping the English to hold on to its southern frontier.
By the time England had defeated the French in 1763 to gain control over all of eastern North America, this fort had been destroyed, many of its soldiers killed or scattered. But in those few years, Fort Loudon had helped in a small way to make sure that this would be an English-speaking country.
It had also done its part in preparing the way for colonial expansion, with its soldiers and traders having pioneered the trails through the nearby mountains and fertile Indian valleys. By 1769, the first home had been built here in Tennessee, not far from this log house, which was begun a year later by a man named William Cobb.
This is historic Rocky Mount, one of the oldest buildings in the state.
Although built as a home, it later served for several years as the first Capitol building of what was called then the territory of the United States south of the River Ohio.
Today, the buildings and grounds have been restored to their original appearance, preserving for all of us to see how the early settlers lived some 200 years ago.
Most of the early homes here were built of logs cut from the nearby forest. How big the house would be depended on the size of the log that a man could lift over his head. Usually this would be around 15 to 16 feet. That's why a 16-foot home became quite common in those early days. A broad axe or adze were used for hewing, which meant flattening the opposite side of the log. For notching the corners, a man used the saw if he was lucky enough to have one.
Most kitchens in those years were built like this one, separated from the main house by at least 40 or 50 feet, and for a very good reason. Without matches to help start your fire, once you had the logs burning, you had to keep the fire going, even through the night, with hot coals to rekindle for another day's cooking. All year long, a fire burned in the kitchen. Sometimes it even burned up the kitchen. That's why they were built away from the main house. If you didn't like stew, you would probably go hungry in early Tennessee. Stew made up a majority of the meals prepared. But what better way to use the dried vegetables, say, for winter days? Sprinkle with bits of meat from freshly killed bear, deer, or wild turkey. What about chicken? Well, they weren't for eating, they were for laying eggs.
To clothe his family, a man had to plant and grow his own flax. Flax contained a fiber-like material that could be woven into linen, or laces, or rope. Here in East Tennessee, it took 2 years from the time the flax was planted until the time that the fibers could be spun and woven into a finished garment. Flax is very dry. You need some water to dampen it so that you can splice the flax to some thread that you already have on your spindle. All you're doing when you're spinning is simply to twist your fibers into a strong thread. Once flax is spun into a thread, it is called linen. This is homespun linen thread.
By 1796, Tennessee had more than enough settlers to become the 16th state of our Union. Many of these families, looking for better farming land, began using the Tennessee River to transport themselves and their possessions downstream on flatboats to settle in the middle and western ends of this long but fertile Tennessee Valley. The river, although very shallow and dangerous in places, became very important to these early farmers. It was like a highway of water, helping them to float their crops down to the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, on down to New Orleans, to be sold and shipped to markets along the Atlantic seaboard. This was a much longer but less difficult way than trying to haul them east up and over the Appalachian mountain ranges. It wasn't long before most of the rich farming land in the entire valley had been claimed and cleared of trees, plowed and planted in crops. During the same period of history, lumbermen began cutting down the rich forests throughout the valley, selling the wood to make their profit, while miners discovered there were large amounts of coal and other minerals for the taking. For over 100 years, farmers, lumbermen, miners used and reused the land without regard for its condition, making it produce what it could before moving on to new land, to repeat their same profit-making cycles.
What happens when you cut down most of the hardwood forests in the mountains without replanting them? Or planting the same crop on the same soil year after year after year, or stripping away the ground cover to dig out the coal and the minerals?
Without trees, grasslands, or carefully planted crops to catch and absorb the large amounts of yearly rain, water will quickly run off such eroded land, filling rivers to overflowing. During seasons of heavy rain, the Tennessee River became an unpredictable river of destruction, destroying farmlands, towns, and parts of cities.
How do you control an uncontrollable river? That question has been asked for many years here in the Tennessee Valley. The solution to the problem began in 1933 through an enormous construction project called the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. The project was so big and so far-reaching that it had to be financed entirely by the United States government. Today, some 30 huge dams like this one control the Tennessee River and its many tributaries from flooding and the awful destruction caused by this once uncontrollable river.
This is Chickamauga Dam, located 7 miles upstream from the city of Chattanooga. This giant piece of concrete not only holds back the Tennessee River, but has backed it up some 50 miles into a huge storage reservoir to catch floodwaters, allowing only enough water to flow downstream to keep the river at a proper depth for shipping. On the main river alone, 9 giant dams were built for flood control at key positions all along the valley, from Paducah, Kentucky, up to Knoxville, Tennessee. If we straightened out the Tennessee River like this, it is easier to visualize the series of 9 dams, each backing up the river into 9 reservoirs, and each capable of catching and holding periodic floodwaters. Turned sideways, they resemble a giant staircase of water, each with a set of locks capable of raising or lowering ships from one part of the river to the next. For the first time in its history, the Tennessee River is now deep enough to handle large cargo-carrying ships. Today, all kinds of heavy raw materials and finished products are being carried up and down this waterway to manufacturing plants in Ohio and Kentucky, to trade centers in Alabama and Missouri, to markets in this and other parts of our nation. A great deal of progress has also been made in restoring forests and farmlands of this region. Through replanting and selective cutting, both soft and hardwood trees are once again growing on the mountains. Fertilizers and new methods of farming are helping to improve the soil. Families throughout the valley now enjoy the benefits of cheap electric power generated at each of the hydroelectric dams.
The Tennessee Valley Authority has been a huge experiment by our national government in this particular region of our country. To say that the TVA is the answer for other sections as well is forgetting that each part of our nation has its own needs and must try and find ways to solve its own problems, with or without help from the national government. I do know that it's taken us a long time to learn what the Indians learned centuries ago, how to live in balance with the nature that surrounds us.